So let's officially move into our agenda. We're doing great. My name is Tex McLeod, and I already told you all that. And I'm the chair of the Saanich North and the Islands Riding Association, which is Adam's BC Green family that looks out for him, who helps him on his elections, who in between elections try to stay vital and integrated into the community. And so one of the ways we do that is through Voices of Saanich and the Islands. And Zoom has been a gift to us in the way that we've been able to share with folks. So that's the welcome. And then what I'd like to do is just acknowledge where I'm speaking to you from and the territory. So I'm calling in on Zoom from Saturna Island. I'm in a sort of a library room just off the kitchen of Saturna Lodge, of all things. And at some point, perhaps you'll come out and visit, folks. So we're in the Saanich territory, and it's the unceded territory of the Saanich people. So whether I'm in North Saanich or whether I'm out in Saturna, I am in Saanich territory. And as some of you may know, Adam is part of my family, along with Joni and Heather and Joack and all of the grandkids, through my beautiful wife, Sylvia Olson. So Adam, that's me. I'm gonna blank here. I'll come back later on when we talk about door prizes and what's coming next. But for now, it's over to you to introduce Erin and Bill. Thank you.
So thanks a lot, Tex, and thank you for the, we thought we almost lost you there, which is indicative of internet on the Southern Gulf Islands. But nonetheless, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce a couple of friends. And you know, I think that our relationship has, Erin and Bill, our relationship over the years has grown, and we've run into each other a few times. I think, Bill, the first time that we got to hang out together was at Butchart Gardens at the Blue Poppy restaurant. You were working at Quest or Tangent at the time, and we're doing a presentation there, I think, for the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce Awards Night, Crystal Awards, I believe it was, or maybe, anyway, somewhere along there. And of course, Erin, well, you've sold me many nice shirts in the past, and we got to know each other through the years through your dad's store, and then as well in local politics here. So it's really wonderful. That's probably a little bit more of an unconventional introduction and bio for the two of you. It's more of a personal biography. You can feel welcome to introduce the more technical aspects of your roles in communications and running and marketing and all things Cascadia Seaweed as you tell your story. But I think I'm turning it over to Erin here to run through some slides, and then I'm going to have a conversation with Bill following that. And I know Marcel asked me where I am located. I am located in the beautiful village of Chocolate here in the Saanich territory, Sartlip First Nation in Broad Bay, where my paternal part of my family has been for since time immemorial. So very nice to make it, to scramble to my home office. And my Sydney office is just a few doors down from where Cascadia is located in Sydney. So over to you, Erin. You can start by laying out the journey and the story of Cascadia Seaweed, and then we can have a conversation about it, and we'll take some questions following.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. I much prefer the personal bio and introduction anyways. But my new role is Manager of Communications at Cascadia Seaweed, and I couldn't be more proud of the work I get to do and share a story. So I'm going to just run through a little bit where we came from and what seaweed farming looks like. And as Adam said, then we'll turn it over to Bill, our chairman of the Cascadia Seaweed Board, and we'll find out a bit more about how Cascadia came to be. So I think I'm already sharing my screen. Sorry about that, Marcel, if that was in the way for you, but we'll get going. So as this group knows very well, we can no longer deny that climate change is affecting our daily lives. And as Bill indicated earlier, seaweed provides a lot of hope for the future. So I'm hoping that through our storytelling tonight, you will feel the same way. Our company, Cascadia Seaweed, was founded in 2019. Oh, there they are. And we are already the largest ocean cultivator of seaweed in North America. And this is due to the amazing leadership of our founders, Bill Collins, Mike Williamson, and Tony Ethier. Our mission is to improve human health, support coastal communities, and heal the earth by cultivating seaweed at scale in the ocean. There are 3 groups of seaweeds, red, greens, and browns. We are growing 2 types of brown kelps in the ocean right now. We are also growing a species of red on land in tanks. You're probably most familiar with the brown kelps that grow quite large and wash up on our beaches. We're using the seaweeds to produce the most delicious and nutritious seaweed plant-based foods. Excuse me. We're also studying how seaweed as a livestock feed can reduce harmful methane emissions. We're closely following the science on how much carbon can be sequestered by seaweed farming. And we're talking about what it might look like to supply or build a biorefinery to produce ingredients needed to make seaweed-based packaging. Cascadia Seaweed wouldn't be successful without our partners, without our Indigenous partners. They're the stewards of the land and the sea. It's their Indigenous wisdom and their values of giving back more than they take, of only taking what they need, that we hold so dear as we scale up this sector for coastal British Columbia. Seaweed farming is regenerative. We don't need arable land or fresh water or other inputs to grow, just the sun and the sea. And while it grows in the ocean, it provides habitat, uptakes excess nutrients, mitigates ocean acidification, sequesters carbon. And because we have a commitment to leave 10% of our farms in the water, kelp farming has the potential to restore naturally occurring kelp forests as the farmed seaweed reaches its reproductive stage of the life cycle. So this is one I'm really excited about. Oh, there's our farms. That's what the farms look like. I'm going to walk you through what kelp farming actually looks like and try to get you excited about it. So in the springtime, we collect the mature reproductive kelp, and we collect that mature kelp from the vicinity of where it's going to be outplanted again. We cut the spores or the dark patches of the seaweed out of the blades of kelp. And then our seaweed scientist, Dr. Jennifer Clark, does her magic. She stresses the seaweeds, which prompts them to release the spores and into salt water, and that creates our spore solution. Can you see my mouse? Maybe you can see my mouse. So I'm over here. We've produced the spore solution. And then that solution is put into inoculation tubes. And inside the tube is a PVC pipe, and it's wrapped with kite twine. The PVC pipe stays in that inoculation tube for 24 hours, and it then is transported into aquariums in our custom-built nursery, where they live the first 45 days of their life in controlled conditions. When we can see a brown fuzzy surface of the kite twine, we know the little baby seaweeds are ready to be planted out on the farm. So we take them, we transport them back out to the farm where they started. Now we have 7 farms in 5 different territories at the moment. So we have to carefully track where the parent stock comes from and where those seeds are then outplanted back into the ocean. So we plant them again in the fall season. To outplant the seeds, we wrap the twine around the farm infrastructure, the rope that is suspended in the ocean. There's anchors on the sea floor and floats and buoys on the surface, and that tensions the ropes. And the farm infrastructure is suspended about 3 meters deep from the surface. Over the next 4 to 5 months, we monitor the growth of the seaweed. but there isn't much we can do to stimulate it. We are farmers. If we're Mother Nature rules the roost, if the water conditions aren't quite right, or the seaweed becomes food for another creature, that happens sometimes. But ultimately, we harvest the beautiful golden blades of kelp for our purposes in the spring. So our team right now is planning to harvest our farms in the next 4 to 8 weeks. One in particular farm is growing so beautifully, we might have to harvest it a little sooner than we originally expected. To harvest the kelp, we pull the lines out of the water using boats, and we cut the seaweed off the lines, and we lay that seaweed into fish totes. And the fish totes are then layered with ice. Those fish totes are transported to a processing facility, and this is where things get transformed into a nutritious and delicious food products. Our first product under the brand Cove Ocean Foods was just released. It's in stores on Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, also on Vegan Supplies website, so you can purchase it online. And if you check out the products tab on the Cove Ocean Foods website, you will see a listing of all of the available locations. And that, folks, is seaweed farming in a nutshell. What did I miss?
I think you captured it all perfectly.
And hopefully on time too.
How long, so I didn't catch it in the presentation, but how long is the seaweed on the lines for? 45 days in the tank, but when they're out when it's out in the ocean, how long is the seaweed growing? How long does it take to grow? 4 to 5 months.
Is that about right?
Yeah, we outplant by the winter solstice, the 21st of December. The kelp follows moon cycles, and it's best to get it in the water before then. And no later than the end of April, you want to harvest it. So 3 to 4 months is max. If you don't harvest it then, and it's fine to leave it in the water, a lot of epiphytes, encrusting organisms, like to attach themselves to the fronds, and that reduces the quality for food grade anyway. It reduces the quality. So we like to harvest, say 3 to 4 months max, and take it out of the water.
So is that the end of your presentation, Erin?
Yeah. So I'll stop the screen sharing if I can get my mouse to go where it needs to go. There it is. There, is that better?
There we go. Okay, cool. So thank you for walking us through that. And maybe I'll just start with to you, Bill, because I know that you, as I mentioned in our introduction, you were doing business here in the Keating Business Park previously. I think retired from there, and then the next thing I know, we were talking about Cascadia Seaweed, and with your regular level of enthusiasm, which is far higher than most people's levels of enthusiasm for anything. And where did that come from? Like, what was the genesis point for you for seaweed farming on the BC coast?
Yeah, when I stepped aside from my day-to-day job in electronics manufacturing, I had been previously doing some work with the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. And with that group, we got Vancouver Island, the whole of Grand Vancouver Island, designated as a foreign trade zone, which is a special designation under the federal government to allow enhanced export of goods and services from the island. And so as part of that, we looked to business cases where Vancouver Island had a particular global competitive advantage. So we started with a blank slate and narrowed it down to 4 and reported on those 4, which included cultural tourism, clean tech, value add for wood products, and aquaculture. And the aquaculture file was a bit challenging because if you're going to attract foreign direct investment, and somebody from, say, South Korea or Europe Googled Vancouver Island and aquaculture, it would blow up in your face over the open net pen salmon farming. But when you peel back a layer of the onion, you see a third leg of the aquaculture stool, which is kelp farming. And how, when you look at the background, how it's been carried out in Asia, for example, for millennia, but in North America, it's relatively new. And when you read statistics like we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet, we have to feed that amount of people. When you look at the stats where 70% of the ocean, the world's planet is ocean, yet only 2% food comes from the ocean. It really it blew my mind that we had an opportunity to cultivate a primary producer in the ocean, which is algae, as opposed to a higher level producer. And as a result, we said, I made the case. And after a few weeks, I realized that this was something that not only could be done, but must be done because of the ecosystem services that kelp provides. And as a result of that, I pulled a team together, Mike and Tony, and that was in 2019 in June. And that was the start of the of Cascadia Seaweed and our march towards bringing 22nd century business to the table for coastal Canada and in particular coastal BC. That's what we're trying to do is build new styles of business to meet the demands of the 22nd century, because folks in North America that are born today might end up living to see the next century.
So how does, we've got a couple of questions here with respect to, and you've alluded to it, when you say aquaculture in British Columbia, it's a fairly tightly defined thing. It largely means the conflict that's been happening about open net finfish aquaculture. That's really what we think about when we think about aquaculture. We think about the negative impacts of that on salmon and the negative impacts on that on other species. And so you're gonna obviously run into on a fairly regular basis that perspective of aquaculture. How do you, what does it have negative impacts on migrating fish? There's a question here about the twine or the netting. What is the impact of your physical infrastructure of what is it, an industrial scale seaweed farm on other species and on salmon in particular, but more widely than that? Birds maybe is also something that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Look, let's be clear. Anytime you're putting any artificial materials into the ocean, ocean is a harsh environment. You will impact the area in which that equipment sits. So there's no doubt about that. From Cascadia's perspective, we do a couple of things. First of all, we try to adhere to best practice when we're going to do this. Now, as Erin mentioned, when you're putting a seaweed farm in the water, there's no nets. It's anchors, floats, and rope. Yes, there's certainly twine that gets wrapped around the production lines. Those production lines, they're in the water for 4 months, and then they get retrieved when the kelp is harvested. Of course, the kelp that we leave on the line will stay on the line, but we're monitoring farms every few weeks on a regular basis anyway, every few weeks typically. So for sure, you have to be careful. One of the biggest concerns that we had when we first started was mammal interaction, because we were scared of putting ropes in the water when you can get whale entanglement, for example. So this is very important that we get this right. We went to OceanWise and through Sustainable Development Technology Canada, got money to at least get to a desk study so that we could frame up the challenge of mammal rope interaction. We brought some experts in, they made some recommendations, and by and large, when you look at open net pen, part of the challenges around mammal interaction are the nets, and particularly the barrier nets, because sea lions and seals are wanting to get in and eat the fish, and they're interacting with those barrier nets. That seems to be the biggest problem when it comes to mammal interaction. Fortunately, mammals don't like to eat seaweed particularly. It's the invertebrates and the encrusting organisms and shrimp, baby like caprolids that like to feast on the kelp. So with no nets and with no real edible challenges for mammals, there's not been that many reports of mammal interaction with seaweed farms. But the other thing you have to do is you have to plan for the worst. So we have a protocol in place that if our nets, or if there's any indication that any beasts, particularly big whales, have come in contact with our nets, we will have folks at the ready to do what's necessary to minimize or mitigate any of the impact. We don't shy away from the question. We embrace the question, and we try to use best practice to get the job done.
Yeah, so it's important to, I mean, I think that's a very important approach because the industry on the coast of BC has, whether not seaweed particularly, but aquaculture more broadly, has a long history. It's important as if you're establishing a new business model that includes the term aquaculture that you're able to answer those questions. So that's really good. And the animals that do feast on your seaweed that you're planting, do they attract like other fish and is there a beneficial impact on the ecosystem by having these nets? I'm thinking like once you talk about kelp forest, for example, what's the benefit of that for the ecosystem and maybe the impact of putting them in and removing them and putting them in and removing them? Is there a negative impact in that regard?
Well, when you have boats, sure. When you have boats in the water, you are impacting the ocean on which you sit. There's no question. From the benefit side, and it's always going to be a cost benefit or a risk benefit approach. From the benefit side, first of all, an anecdote that we've had a farm now up in Hawaiian territory on Danvers Island, so just this side of Bamfield. And the loggers that run up and down the coast know the farm is there. And over the last 3 years, they've told us that the marine life that has come back and that's associated with that farm is tremendous. Whether you're talking seabirds, whether you're talking fish, whether you're talking mammals, and even we're seeing that they're seeing more wildlife on the beaches of this relatively remote part of Barkley Sound. So anecdotally, we strongly believe that kelp cultivation, because it's a primary producer, it's at the base of the food chain, it does represent habitat and food for organisms that live in and on the water. So in order to, that's an anecdote. Mind you, it comes from loggers, and they're pretty observant about the coast around them. What we believe, and it was supported by the BC Salmon Restoration Foundation, we believe that kelp forests are important for salmon, wild salmon. The loss of that primary producer, the loss of refugia in terms of kelp forests, which we have seen, will challenge us globally. So we have some money and a science project working on 2 farms where we're monitoring. We're putting a lot of gear, of scientific instrumentation in the water to look at everything from nutrient supply to phytoplankton to fish, where we call them kelp cams. We have 20 kelp cams sitting over 2 farms, and they're looking at the fish. So the goal of the project is to quantify salmon, the benefit, if there is a benefit to salmon recruitment from kelp farms. We think it is. We see fish in and around the kelp farm, even though we're only in the water 4 months. Kelp grows so prolific and so fast that forests will literally crop up overnight. In our farm here in Saanich, every week the size doubled from when they were, millimeter sized 1 week. The next week they're this big. The next week they're this big. So we see fish, we see wildlife, and we believe when we do the science to quantify the effects, we will find the positive effects that we think will be important. The other thing, Adam, that we do know there's science, there's research ongoing, in Europe is that kelp farms serve to deaden noise. As you can tell, any baffle in a room will deaden the sound because sound will get absorbed. And so there's research now ongoing about the use of kelp barriers to mitigate sound, particularly with cetaceans such as orcas and other animals that communicate with sound, and the impacts of supporting noise abatement for marine traffic vessels. So we think there's a net benefit. And Erin mentioned the other ecosystem services. And this is really key. There is a risk to putting things in the water there, but we believe the net benefit is tremendous in ecosystem services that kelp cultivation can provide. And we're looking to quantify that. There's been a bunch of work scientifically that suggests that. We ourselves want to continue on that methodology and bring science to bear on that question of, if it is positive, which we believe it is, how positive is it against the backdrop of putting artificial materials in the water?
I appreciate it. I think I don't want you to hear my questions coming from no disruption is the only level that I think that we recognize that there is going to be disruption, and it's about how we handle that and relate to it. And I think that you're going to learn a lot from the Saanich about how we relate to the ocean. You're going to hear about how the Hawaiian and your other partners and the relationships that they have and they have had over the years as well. I think probably one of the questions that you can ask your Saanich partners around is the locations of our reef nets. Reef net locations were, my understanding, very close to or around kelp reefs. Basically, the reefs where kelp grew off of was, all the way dotted down Haro Strait on the San Juan Island side. Very similar to the areas that you would be seeding farms and growing kelp. Very similar territory as that. So there was a question with respect to around the relationships with the Indigenous nations on the coast, and the question from Francis was around how does the tenure work in these areas. I think there's probably a variety of answers to that. Why don't we start out on the west coast of Vancouver Island with our Nuu-chah-nulth relatives. And then we can have a conversation about the announcement that you made on Friday with Sayo, because that's one that I know quite a bit about, and I think is an interesting situation that's occurring just outside of in our riding with respect to Indigenous rights. So and business, actually, Indigenous rights and business. So why not talk about the relationships that you have with the Nuu-chah-nulth and with the other groups?
Yeah, we entered the picture being seasoned marine folks, but for knowing zero about kelp farming. One of the partners, Mike Williamson, who was base commander at Esquimalt, had significant experience in working with First Nations, coastal First Nations in southern Vancouver Island. So we went to the Uchuclassit Chief Charlie Coots. They expressed an interest through their company. That they own a company, as do 4 or 5 other nations own Nuu-chah-nulth Seafoods. So through Nuu-chah-nulth Seafoods, we sat around the boardroom table at the Uchuclassit, and Chief Coots was very clear to us in what was acceptable and what wasn't from their perspective, and every nation is different. He said, for example, respect for the ocean and its inhabitants is primary goal number 1. In terms of business, he said, we as the Uchuclassit Nation must own the assets. We don't want Cascadia coming in, putting equipment in our water that we have no say in. So he was very clear on the relationship. We drafted the terms of an agreement in plain language. Mike and I and Tony wrote the first draft agreement and put it in front of the Uchuclassit folks. And Chief Coots said, yeah, this is something I can I can embrace because it will bring the economic development opportunity to my citizens. And our prime goal was to get it right, because we believed other nations and other communities, coastal communities in British Columbia and beyond, would be interested in doing this. So it's with his advice and guidance that we entered the first agreement. And from there, we now have 6, I think, other agreements on the West Coast with Howsit. And we have an agreement on the east coast of Vancouver Island with the Klahoose in the Discovery Islands, because they saw kelp aquaculture as perhaps a transitional industry from open net pen farming. And they, of course, wanted the sea can provide an economic development opportunity if it's executed correctly. So with those folks, we've spent the last 2 years building firms with them, using their citizens where possible, with a view towards building capacity. Because the challenge that we find and many nations find is they have great ideas, but not necessarily the workforce to be able to accomplish all their goals. They have to find partnerships. And that's something that we strongly believe. Ultimately, Cascadia has a vision, and I don't mind telling you what that vision is. Our vision is to build up this industry to the point where it's a large economic driver for coastal British Columbia. And then our goal would be to see it First Nation owned. There's no reason that coastal First Nations of British Columbia can't own the seaweed industry in North America. It's traditional. Their use of seaweed is traditional. Coastal peoples have a really strong opinion on how it's to be executed and monitored and mapped out. So in our view, this would be the happiest day of our lives if we were to cede control to coastal nations. So that's roughly the sketch, Adam, of what's happening in Barkley Sound. We're moving to the North Coast and on the East Coast. And you may want to ask about the recent conversations.
Well, just so, I mean, the way that you framed it, I think it's when you talk about the ocean, there are economic, just the way you phrased it, there are economic opportunities in the ocean. For the Saanich people, for the Saanich, that's all that there was. As well, not maybe all that there was, but a vast majority of what was is resource development of the ocean. That I've mentioned the reef net. Reef net's an example of an incredible piece of technology that was used to harvest salmon and develop. And you know, that if you listen to our elders talk about how wealthy we are as a people, we are wealthy because of our relationship to the salmon and the resource development relationship, but also a different connection. So those are, you know, it is for coastal First Nations, it's very natural to look to the ocean for the generation of wealth, and not just in terms of things, but the wealth that was generated from the ocean was able to actually turn into cultural wealth and incredible art and incredible cultural development. So when you point to and we look at the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and we look to the expressed goals of shared decision making, mutual benefit, mutually beneficial economic development opportunities, really that is the most important opportunity for coastal First Nations. It has been logging up until now, but I think that this is a really important way to balance that the economic opportunities.
Yeah,
sorry, that was a long rant.
Well, no, I couldn't agree more. Sometimes it's easy to forget in light of, you know, the roads and the highways and the jetties and the boats that we see all around us, and the sporties that, you know, love to catch salmon. It's easy to forget that this was, you know, a main driver of prosperity for coastal BC. And Mike Williamson and I, we have this debate all the time. Are we delivering prosperity or are we delivering profitability? I say profitability, because if we don't make money in this venture, we're not going to help many people deliver the economic benefits that we believe are there. However, the whole mantra of economic development in coastal British Columbia and small communities around the world anyway, the whole economic development mantra is changing because it's not all about growth, continued growth and driving and continued profitability. It's more about taking a breather and delivering prosperity. And so I fully accept Mike's view of the world to bring prosperity. And that's our goal, is to give people an opportunity to work on the water, to go back to their homes, to work on the water, to farm seaweed. We're going to do our best to make sure it is a in-demand commodity for, at the very least, for pristine, beautiful BC waters and command the highest value in the marketplace. But it will be a driver of prosperity, we believe. And this is why when it comes to last Friday, where I had the distinct honor of sitting next to Chief Harvey Underwood of Saanich, for the last year, more than a year, we've been talking about how we drive economic development forward and opportunities for the members of Saanich. When in the context of licensing and of control of the dynamics of bringing industry onto the sea, as dictated by, say, the province and the federal governments. Frankly, what drove our position was we can't wait to save the planet, and we believe seaweed cultivation will be a solution, not the solution or not the only solution, but a solution to improving our coastal ocean. And I think, Adam, it might have been you and I, when you might have been out campaigning the last time, standing in the street corner on Sidney, and I bawled out to you. I was expressing frustration at the delay of licensing of tenures. And you said, that's easy. Go talk to the Saanich nations. They know all about the Saanich has a Douglas Treaty. We should be exercising that right for our own destiny. And I took you to heart, and we went back and started the conversation. And on Friday, that conversation, I guess it was 2019, culminated in an agreement where the Saanich First Nation proclaimed their own marine use law as granted the rights under the Douglas Treaty they were capable of doing. And the catalyst was, of course, seaweed cultivation. It's not going to be that's not the end of the story. Perhaps it's just the start of this story. But as a result of the proclamation of a law by the Saanich, and then the granting of a license by the Saanich for Cascadia Seaweed to operate a seaweed farm, ultimately it is the Saanich Seaweed Farm. We're just going to operate it. And that was the lawyer for the Saanich said that in his view, it was the first time it's been done in Canada. And it started on a street corner in Sydney. But we can say, and Erin will speak this more, this is reverberating around the world because it is a clear example of UNDRIP in action. And but it didn't come, it came from the grassroots, from two people talking on a street corner, and an opportunity to revisit, to regain that the industry and the culture. First Nations were so industrious in the use of the ocean, and it recaptured that. And Adam, I'll say one thing about the agreement itself. There's three components. One, there is a revenue stream directly, right away, from the use of a tenure or a seaweed farm established in Saanich territory. Secondly, the Saanich have access to 5% of the seaweed, because there's an incredible gap in seaweed coming onto land and being used by citizens of Saanich. It's probably a 50 to 60 to 80 year gap. The elders will tell us they used to collect seaweed on a Saturday 60, 70 years ago and carry it down to Chinatown in Victoria to sell it to restaurateurs. So there's a reconnection of that biomass, which has been dwindling for the last 5-6 decades. And the third component is conservation. And here's the most important thing from my perspective. Conservation doesn't just mean sustaining what we have today, because we've lost so much. 50% of the ocean's biodiversity has been lost. So it's not sustainable is not good enough anymore. It has to be regenerative. And that's the third pillar of that agreement, which is to help the coastal ocean recover from the 5, 6, 8 decades of abuse. Those 3 pillars of that agreement, we hope will serve as a model for other nations that want to bring active climate activism, marrying prosperity for coastal nations and coastal communities in general. It's not limited to First Nations. And finally, a way we can support the planet in ways that perhaps we haven't done or haven't had the focus in the last, I don't know, 6, 8 decades.
Adam, you were there at the ceremony on Friday. The pride in the leadership around the Saanich table was just so heartwarming.
Yeah, I mean, well, the reality of it is that when I, as one of the 87, say 86 people, I guess, that stood up and voted for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, we call it the Declaration Act, so we don't have to say that big long name every time. So so in voting for the Declaration Act, I think we all probably had our different ideas of what that would mean, and there was a lot of disappointment originally around, the conversations that I had with a lot of my First Nations friends and relatives and contacts just in politics, because it didn't change anything immediately. From you couldn't see what that change was. It wasn't tangible. But this, as I said on Friday, this was an example. I had the same feeling on Friday that I had when it passed, because what it showed was that we made a commitment to, first of all, Indigenous people's right to self-determination, to make decisions about their land and territory. Our premier repeats often that it is the Indigenous leaders and their decision makers on the land that are making decisions about these. This is exactly what Saanich has done. And this is what I expect Sartlip, my community, and the leadership in Sartlip to do, and to do soon, is to say, look, we have had a treaty here for a long time. It has given us the right to fish and hunt as formerly, which is the ability to harvest from the marine environment, and to assert that and take control of that is, first of all, a really fascinating exercise in the development of it'll be interesting to see how the federal and provincial governments respond to this, because what Saanich did was create a law under their authority to create laws, and it's a legitimate law. It's a quality, it wasn't done on, it was done in a thoughtful way. They went through a process to do it. And Erin, to the point that you were making around pride, to have Mavis, Elder Mavis Underwood, stand up and talk about remembering when she was around the table to vote in favor of this, and now seeing it come to life. So and to that conversation that we had on the street while I was campaigning, that was from a frustrated MLA who had to continually, when I say had to, but we had, how many meetings did we have about how difficult it was to just basically communicate with the provincial government in a way that you were getting answers, and not, I think there's always the tension that you want them to make their decisions quicker and more efficiently and all those things. And that's what every business in our community is advocating with me as an MLA to do. But the challenges that we were having with the provincial government weren't that. It was that they weren't, there was no priority for this, when clearly the provincial government has a responsibility to look at industry and to work with industry to help, to help see if this is a viable industry on our coast. And in addition to that, to ensure that it's being done safely, to the best practices, and all the things that you've talked about in the development of your business. So there are a few questions. You've talked about having farms in the Discovery Islands, on the West Coast with our Newtoneth relatives, and then now down here on the south east coast of Vancouver Island with the in the Saanich, the Saanich territory. There's been a number of questions about water temperature. It's kind of like the ideal, what did I write here? It's like the ideal location and growing conditions for your farms. There's a series of questions that have shown up here. It's like, what kind of water temperature do you need? How sensitive are these kelps to the change in water temperature? Can it be done close to the shore and far out? Like, what is the ideal growing conditions for you? What are you looking for? I own a chunk of water. Is it the right thing for me? Tell me, what do I need to have the great growing conditions for your kelp, or for the kelp? I guess you're growing local stuff, so it's.
Yeah, I mean, it would be crazy for us to pick a kelp that didn't grow in a particular area. Now, just because it doesn't grow there today doesn't mean it hasn't grown there in the past. Kelp needs 8 to 12 degree water. It needs a lot of flush. The different species, there's 600 species off our shores here. So not all kelps require the same oceanographic setting, but typically they like current passing over them because access to nutrients is the big thing. You want, for some species, you want higher energy. For some species, you want lower energy. For us to minimize the infrastructure in the water and to minimize cost, you want to get in 30 meters of water or less, because the deeper you go, the more scope your anchors have to have, and it means more infrastructure in the water, which is costly. In our view, the unit economics are not there for us. Cascadia has not made a profit, and it likely won't make a profit for at least another year, because everything we're doing is new. There are no seaweed processors in North America, or very few. There's no seaweed harvesting vessels. There are in Asia. They're developing in Europe. We're using catch as catch can in terms of our support from local fishers with local equipment. So we got to drive costs down in order to be profitable. And as I said before, we must be profitable. There is a role to play in higher energy farms that are further offshore. The new Aquaculture Act is accommodating offshore aquaculture, whatever that looks like. And of course, it has to be followed up with strong regulatory guidance on how this gets done. There are many pitfalls to doing it offshore, but we need to grow at scale. So unlike, and I can understand folks that say, oh, the industrialization of the coastal zone, and they'll show us a picture of a 150 square kilometer seaweed farm off the coast of China. In North America, and with the guidance of coastal First Nations, we'll never operate like that. We will find the right balance of competing interests. As long as we're continuing to drive ecosystem services and improve biodiversity and all the other benefits that go with seaweed farm, we will want to scale up. We'll want to provide greater opportunity. We need to be profitable, and scale is one of the methods that you become profitable, and innovation is the other. What innovation will drive for us is it will help us drive costs down, and that's important because it is a new industry in North America.
So, but it's not a new. I mean, as I think Erin mentioned in her presentation, it's not a new industrial kelp farming or seaweed farming has been happening in. I mean, you just have to take a Google flyover the shoreline of Korea as an example to see the modern version of it. But they've been harvesting in Asia, and particularly in Korea, seaweed quite a bit for a long time. So all of these, when you talk about the anecdotal potential impacts of having gear in the water and all of that, what are you seeing from the industrial kelp farming in Asia, other than what you were talking about, in terms of what do you learn from them, and is there equipment that you can bring over from there that is more suited to what you're doing, or how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a very, very different style of farming. It's heavily labor dependent. In many cases, workers will actually wade out onto flats to harvest seaweed. Once it's brought to shore, it's carried by humans in baskets to deliver to the plants. And this is the way it's been done, as you point out, for many years. We're part of a consortium of 20 global seaweed farmers under the auspices of Alexandra Cousteau, who's looking at ocean biodiversity. The oldest farm in our consortia is 300 years old, but it's a vastly different approach. We have much higher energy waters in and around our coastline. There's much more flushing. However, there is a silver lining to that, in that the North Pacific Ocean will probably be one of the least impacted by water heating, by ocean water heating of any of the world's ocean. It does sit in a really decent spot to allow us time to change the ways of terrestrial operating with energy and other negative impacts driving climate change. We have some time in the North Pacific, not a lot, perhaps more time than other oceans to get it right here. And that's our goal, is to get it right. Seaweed does, to answer one of your questions, seaweed is impacted by water temperature. And we're engaged, for example, with a UBC research team. Actually, around the blade of a seaweed, there's a bacterial ecosystem. And that biome of bacteria has an incredible influence over the seaweed as it grows, and everything from temperature tolerance to reduction of biofouling, which are the encrusting organisms that sit on the seaweed. There's so much we don't understand about seaweed, but we must, because we are losing biodiversity daily for this wonderful algae, and we have to stop that trend.
So ocean acidification, sequestration of carbon, sequestration and other pollutants. Talk about how, in a little bit more detail as you can, with respect to those three aspects. How does it impact? I know the answers. So Erin is also, for everybody, just so you know, Erin has been adding a wealth of information, like websites worth of information in the chat here for you. And one of them has been around the reduction of ocean acidification. You can actually find the written material in the content. But so if you want to answer that question just about the kind of the impact on ocean acidification, other pollutants and carbon, then when we come back, we can talk about, because we've picked Cascadia has picked a donor to receive donations, and we can talk about that, Erin, when we get back after, or when Bill's done.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype in the world of ocean carbon disposal at the moment. And the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine in the US struck a committee of which Kate Moran of Ocean Networks Canada in Victoria sits on this very esteemed high-level committee of scientists, ocean scientists. And they identified half a dozen methods where ocean carbon disposal could mitigate a substantial amount of greenhouse gases. One of the ideas that was put forward, and the science is not young in this. Folks have been studying seaweeds in Vancouver Island for almost 5 decades now, Louis Druhl. But one of the things was proposed was kelp cultivation for purposes of sequestering carbon and then permanently capturing carbon and permanently sequestering it. The science is still out, the jury is still out, but there are business models that are being put forward and are being funded for companies that sole purpose is to grow kelp and then sink it so that it becomes part of the geological time scale of carbon. From our purposes, we can't get the economics to work on right today, which is a $15 to $25 per ton cost price for carbon. For us, we would have to start seeing carbon in the vicinity of $500 per ton before it would make any kind of economic sense for us to do that. However, when you when you grow seaweed, because it grows so fast, it has the ability to capture a tremendous amount of carbon in a very short period of time. We believe, while it won't be an economic driver for us, it is possible to augment the revenue stream from carbon offsets once the science is there that justifies the quantification. My view is a little bit different. My view is that ecosystem services in general will be part of a value chain for any company that's growing seaweed working offshore. And if you take the whole package of ecosystem services, don't forget about nitrogen. right? Nitrous oxide is a tremendously bad GHG. So it's a very short lifespan, but it's 300 times more potent as a GHG than CO2. Where nitrogen comes in is in the areas where we've really poorly treated the landmass through agricultural to heavy agriculture, where there's a lot of nitrogen getting into an ecosystem, a coastal ecosystem, and that buggers the balance.
That's a Saanich Inlet.
A good example, although Saanich Inlet is really not too bad compared to other places on Earth, and the outflow from the Fraser River, for example.
Right.
Seaweed doesn't like to grow where there's fresh water, so you got to find the balance. But I read a recent study, a notional study that said if seaweed farms were cultivated in the Gulf of Mexico, where there's heavy industrialization of the coastal zone, the value of ecosystem services that seaweed cultivation could provide would give the farm a value of somewhere between $3,000 and $27,000 per year per hectare. Because of the uptake of the nitrogen, then you reduce algal blooms, you reduce deoxygenation, and it sets the balance right. And here's a tidbit if you're talking about circular economy. What about if you took some of that seaweed and you turned it into fertilizer and offset some of the nitrogen or the phosphates that you're putting in as fertilizer? It reduces the phosphate. It gives you a more natural solution to fertilizing the soil, to soil stimulants. It's not just a fertilizer. It actually stimulates bacterial activity in the soil. So you're repairing the soil. You're not just using that soil as a media filled with say phosphates to help the plants grow. So there is economic activity beyond that. From a personal and a private corporation perspective, as I mentioned, 22nd century, we need to show carbon on our balance sheet. We need to be ascribed a value for ecosystem services. Only then will companies such as Cascadia begin to be profitable, because we're treating the value not just in terms of pure economics, but in terms of contribution to a regenerative planet. When we start getting valuation for that, you will see more companies like us spring up, and that will change the cycle of business, we believe, for the 22nd century.
Very cool.
And Bill didn't even talk about feeding cows seaweed and reducing methane.
Yeah, I love that topic.
So, well, talk about it. But hold on a second. You can talk about it in just a second, because Erin and I are going to talk for you. You take a breath, because to have a drink of water and or beer or whatever you got there. And so, Erin, we ask because the Voices of Saanich is a free, when we're online, we do a free webinar. It has been traditionally a small fundraiser for the Saanich North and the Islands Riding Association. However, when we went online, we decided instead to pick a charity. And so maybe you can talk about the charity. And what we do is we just ask anybody and everybody who's on here, if you were thinking about making a contribution to somewhere, or if you feel that this has been valuable, that you could go to this charity and make a contribution. So what did you choose, and why did you choose it?
I on behalf of Cascadia, I chose the Say Out Big House fundraiser, not only because they're a partner in our business, but they're our neighbors and our cousins, our community members, and bringing back their house of culture is important to me personally and us as a company. So that's why I suggest people take a look at the Say Out Big House fundraiser and consider making a donation.
Yeah, so I put the link in the chat. I believe I shared, yes, I did share it with everybody. So you can click the link, sayout.ca/bighouse. And I'll just if I might just kind of connect this to the conversation that we were having about wealth and wealthy culture. And you're using profitability and prosperity, which are, which I think in the end, we're kind of saying the same thing, just the way I've heard it through my relatives talking about the wealth that was generated in our society, that it was tangible in terms of stuff, things, and a lot of what happened in the Longhouse was the trade of things, the exchange of items that were of value and money. However, it was also the wealth of the culture. And in the longhouse is the home of that culture. It's the house. It's the house of governance. It's the house of the Saanich culture. It's where the business was done. It's where we had shelter for our families. But it was also where very important community business was done, where governance occurred, where the families got together and had these conversations that needed to be had. So thank you for choosing this. Thank you for being partners with Saanich, but as well, thank you for choosing this as a place to make it. It is an indication of that you're kind of paying attention to your partners. So I really appreciate that. And I've also been trying to get the provincial government to make a contribution, because I've made the same pitch to them. I said, look, like, these longhouses are homes of governance. If what we're talking about is reconciliation and self-determination and governance and decision-making, then these traditional houses of governance are really, really critically important to the future decision-making on the land base that we call British Columbia right now. Emily made a statement here. There's lots, made a question here with respect to requiring nutrient-rich locations. Do they grow in nutrient-deprived locations and then add nutrient? Like, can they be additive, or do they require that high nutrient load to be there to grow and to thrive? And like, how much do they take from the environment, as opposed to how much do they, how much of that do they improve the waters around there, I guess is the question.
Yeah, if there's no nutrients in the water, seaweed won't grow. One of the first farms that we put out was in a place called Useless Inlet in Uchucklesset territory. Go figure. They'd grown oysters there, and they grew test lines of kelp. They seemed to be fine. So I think, without getting into a catch-22 situation or a chicken and egg situation, we start somewhere, and we start where we believe kelp will grow. And the first thing you do is look around. Is kelp growing there today? Yes. That's an important indicator that kelp will grow. What we think is this: in much the same way as you're sowing seeds on a barren ground, it's going to take a few generations as the soil builds up, or in this case, as the seed load that makes a seed available to a surrounding area. The more seaweed we put in, particularly if it hasn't grown there in the past, or it gets challenged or disrupted from everything from putting jetties in to roads in, we can at least repair that disruption. By doing it soundly but with monitoring. We can also tell, we believe, because we're leaving seaweed on the line, it will go through its own reproductive cycle, and it will proliferate. The more seed that's in the water, we believe, the better it is for the growth improvement of that of those kelp species, and then we believe it will improve biodiversity. So it does need nutrients to grow to begin with. The question of, will it make barren all the nutrients that exist? I think Mother Nature has a great ability to compensate. So I think ultimately, by giving it a chance, by putting new kelp in the water in a bigger way, because we're growing it and allowing it to proliferate from a seed, from a very, very early stage, into a more robust kelp gametophyte, which is a meter long, we're helping it through that really sensitive stage, and then putting more in the water that are seeds or kelp babies in the water that are more robust. So there is evidence in the Chinese farm that has whatever it is, 15 kilometers or 10 kilometers on a side, that at the center of this farm you're getting nutrient starvation, and I can believe it. I can't imagine a scenario where that will be the case here, because regardless of whether or not you have a nutrients, we're not going to let farms get to that scale. At least I don't want to be a party to a farm that gets to that scale. But moreover, because of this coast has high flushing and high energy, by and large, Mother Nature will manage and guide and govern. And to me, that's the important thing if we're treating our coastal oceans water in, because don't forget the coast of China, there's so much effluent going in that when you stress an environment, we saw this on Ray Creek, Adam, when you're stressing an environment, a water environment, by many other forcing factors, any small shift will cause a fish kill, for example. But by doing a good job of respecting the inputs to the coastal ocean and the nearshore sediments, we will give this coast the best chance it has to again thrive in areas that it may not have been thriving, say, for the last 5 decades. So we want to be the catalyst for that biodiversity and for that new growth.
Okay, so there's we're getting close to time here. There's a few questions, so I'm going to get into rapid fire, and one of the questions is about cattle feed. So we're going to get into that. Is there any bycatch? So Diane asked about bycatch. Is there any bycatch in this industry? I think thinking about the fishing industry, there's a lot of unintended creatures that are caught while we're using like big net kind of fisheries. So is there any bycatch in this industry?
We have in some cases where the lines have been in the water the longest, there's mussels. As the kelp comes out of the water, it comes up on a slide and it gets washed. So if there are epiphytes or small shrimp or those kinds of things that aren't physically attached to the kelp, they will typically get washed back in the water because they're no good for us. We don't want to see them. It causes extra cost and degrades the quality of the kelp. So that all gets washed back in. There's no real bycatch per se. We're not using a net. We're hauling up on the rope the kelp blades that we put in the water. There's other questions about, for example, parasites or disease. We don't really fully understand kelp disease. We don't see any diseased kelp. Some of the researchers are looking at as I said, kelp genetics. So it will be an important factor as we move forward and allow the industry to scale out. But as yet, we don't see that at all in any of the kelp that we're growing. And I don't believe there's much science in terms of what diseases are growing naturally on kelp, because kelp has been so largely understudied, except for a few hotspots like Banfield Marine Science Center and UBC.
Cool. Okay, great. So you find a location, you put some gear in the ground, or you put some gear in the ocean, seed the lines, and then do you remove all of the gear again, or is there some gear left?
Yeah, some gear left. We remove the production lines on which the kelp grows with the twine around it, except for the science lines that we leave in. And we've made a commitment to leaving kelp in the water because we believe will go through its own reproductive cycle and continue to grow out well beyond our farms. So we attempt to clean our sites as robustly as we can, but we are leaving anchors and we are leaving floats that are sourced as locally as we can, conscious of things like styrofoam, floats breaking down into styrofoam and microplastics. We're very conscious of that. We have a large maintenance program, because we operate in coastal First Nations, and the coastal folks are always walking the beaches, and they're always on the lookout for this kind of thing. It will not be a welcome sight for us to find bits of our seaweed farm brought up by a citizen walking the beach in their territory. That will be the death. More of those things will be the death of this industry before it even gets going. So we're very, very conscious of that.
Okay, cool. So we have a door prize, and I don't know what they are. So they're really great.
I know what they are.
They're the best door prizes that we've had. Okay, we've got Sea Spice door prizes. You get to have some of the brand new Sea Spice kelp made by this company here. So here, okay.
Cove Ocean Foods, powered by Cascadia Seaweed.
That's the one that I was. This awesome company with a name, Cove Ocean Foods. So what we need for you is to put your birth month and date in the chat. And if you just click down on the bottom in the little chat area, put your birth date and month in there, and then the person with the closest birth dates, we don't need the years, birth dates and months, to one to Erin and then one to Bill, then you'll win Sea Spice, and we'll get them to you. We'll deliver them to you. There people are doing that, so that's great. All right. So Malcolm has asked a question about cattle feed, and I know that this was something that and Malcolm, if you've put that in the Q&A, if you could put it in the chat, that would be great. Malcolm just added his birth date to the Q&A. Okay, with respect to cattle feed and livestock feed, you're mentioning that you're developing products. I think one of the things, I mean, there's probably nearly an endless number of products that we could talk about that could be made from this. We're talking about some spice in this, but the impact on the cattle industry, that has also been an industry that has been taking some heat, of course, for the amount of emissions that they produce, both through the amount of water that's consumed and then the amount of emissions that are produced. So how might seaweed impact that?
Yeah, there's certain seaweeds that when you feed them to cows, it reduces the methane burps by more than 90%. It's not the back end, it's the front end that causes the methane emissions, for folks that are wondering. You know, Adam, it makes all the sense to me that an observer, a science observer, about a decade ago, looking at cows feeding on beaches, seaweed on beaches, looked really healthy. And so he decided to study the impacts of cows eating seaweed, and he found some incredible observations. And he said to the Canadian government, as a Dalhousie researcher, you know what, I want some money. I think this is really an opportunity to change up the terrestrial source of feed for these animals. The Canadian government said, nope, we're not interested in funding you, but the Aussies said, come on down, the price is right. You're the next contestant on seaweed aquaculture and agriculture. After about 6 or 8 years of research, Future Feed was born from the government science agency in Australia, and they use a tropical seaweed called Asparagopsis. When you cultivate it in the ocean and you feed it to cows, it reduces methane by an astounding amount. So 90+% as compared to other terrestrial-based solutions such as our garlic, lemongrass, garlic oil, for example, 3 to 4%. There is a new drug in the European market. It's strictly a drug. It's called 3-NOP, partially developed by the government of Canada, which claims to reduce methane in the area of 20+%, but nowhere near the 90%. So the brown kelps that we grow off the coast of British Columbia have an incredible opportunity. We're saying conservatively, based on the science that's there today, and albeit it's not vast thousands of papers, there's probably a few hundred papers out there that have looked at this, but all indications are that brown seaweeds will bring a methane reduction. And today we're saying in the order of 5 to 15%. When you think that's a cow probably belches out the equivalent in tonnage CO2 that a car belts out, we can save 20% by growing seaweed in the ocean and feeding it to cows. That's a good thing. So there's a triple bottom line here, because when you grow seaweed in the ocean, you're sequestering the carbon. Even if you're harvesting it, bits drop off the seaweed. Some say up to 20%, fall to the seafloor and eventually get transported to the deep ocean. If they get transported to the deep ocean before they get remobilized, it's a permanent sequestration scenario. You feed that seaweed that you harvest to cattle and dairy cows, and it's good for them because it's loaded with micronutrients. Did I say it was a superfood? Although we're trying not to use that term for seaweed because superfoods come and go. When you feed it to cows,
it's the goji berry of the seaweed.
Love it.
I'm sorry.
the collateral also, Adam, by the way, is that when you feed seaweed to cow, if the bacteria in the cow gut is not transforming that feed into methane, that food energy is going back to the beast. So we're seeing feed conversion ratio improvements, upwards of 15% perhaps, which really means to get the same weight of an animal, you need maybe 15% less water to grow 15% less terrestrial energy foods for the cattle. So it's a win from growing it, it's a win from methane, and it could be a win for improving sustainability of animals if we're reducing the amount of terrestrial space required to feed them. This is why we're so excited about seaweed for animal feed, because we're so excited, we will be announcing in a few weeks a major federal government grant to study this, to get right down to the detailed components of the seaweed that drive changes in the cow gut biome. And this will be money that will allow us and our partners in government, who are the major contributors to the body of knowledge in agri-feeds in Alberta, it will allow us together to provide other solutions for the climate emergency, not just on the carbon sequester side, or as I mentioned before, on the ecosystem services side.
Well, I hate to break it to you, Bill, but you just announced, you can't announce it in a couple of weeks because you just announced it now. So
Adam, you know what?
have to talk to the director of communications about.
We can't wait. We can't wait for government.
Happened.
We got to do it.
It just happened. Okay. All right. So do we have the, can someone put in for me or text, or are you going to join us to let us know who it is that won there is Tex.
So I don't know who won. Paul's doing that, but both birthdays are in April, and Erin is the 2nd and Bill is the 11th. And so if you're close on either side, you are the happy winner of these wonderful seaweed spice events. And as far as we'll deliver them to you, no, you go pick them up at Adam's office.
Well, it doesn't look like.
Or Cascadia's office.
Yeah, pick them up from us and we tell you more about seaweed.
Yeah,
oh,
right.
there you go. So I'm not sure. We'll let Paul calculate the winners, and maybe I can just say we have another Voices of Saanich, but I'm hard to imagine it can be more interesting than this one. So thank you very much, Erin and Bill, for joining us. That was a great evening. And so we do have another one coming up, though, in April 5th. And I hear great things about Andy McKinnon. Andy has written a book with Kem Luther on the mushrooms of BC, and it's been a bestseller in BC for about 8 or 10 weeks now. And Andy's going to join us and talk about the relationship between fungi and the forests. And that will be on April 5th. So watch for that poster. We're gonna get that out soon. And with that, let me see if we've got the winners. Did we get them? Paul, are you there? Can you put up the winners, please?
I don't see any April birthdays on this list. I just see a couple of May birthdays.
We may be doing May then.
So do we have Paul? Winners are Dan Kells and Jocelyn Gifford.
Oh, wonderful. They couldn't go to better folks. Hi, Dan. Hi, Jocelyn. Thanks for being here.
Go Roberts Bay. Go Roberts Bay.
Exactly. Okay, congratulations to Dan Kells and Jocelyn Gifford. And thank you to Erin and to Bill. I was like, what is his name? To Bill. Thank you so much for for being great constituents, and as well and one of the things that I just want to say is, you know, as you've been talking, you talk a lot about kelp in terms of kind of the fact that a lot of this innovation is happening, but as well, a lot of the information around the innovation is developing at the same time. And so, you know, I think as we go forward here, and you know, as you're building kind of the case for growing seaweed, you're also building the evidence behind why it can be both a good thing and the things that we have to be working as regulators, and in my role in government is to ensure that we are, you know, as you pointed out, we don't want a bunch of gear washed up on the beach. So we're going to have to find out what those regulations are. And I'm sure that a lot of them are already in place for that, a specific one, but there are so many questions to ask. And it's been encouraging throughout tonight to really hear the way you're framing this, is that you're curious, you're asking the questions, you want to find out, you want to minimize the impacts, you want to get ahead of it before it gets so, you know, and our relationship goes back a long way, as people here will have sensed, and that has always been, that curiosity and that innovation has always been at the center of what's been driving this, is asking the question and then finding an answer and then challenging the answer that you get. And that's really an important scientific process that is all the way through this. So thank you for innovating it. Thank you for asking those questions and looking for the answers, and all the best as you continue on this work. So I don't really have much else to say. Do you have anything else to say at the end of this? We're going to wrap up now.
Thanks for having us, Tex and Adam,
Yeah.
and all of Sandra.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
That was good. Nice to see you both again, and here's to seeing you both in public. And you do have to come over and visit us at Saturna. It's a pretty cool place. So. And that's actually probably to everybody. So
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Make your donations to Say Out, help them get their big house built. Thank you, Bill and Erin. Thank you, Adam, and all those in the back. Thanks for joining
Text
us.
froze.
All the best.
Thank you to
Cheers.
Linda and everybody else who was put everyone in the background. Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
All right.